This is the story of how a nation bought the World Cup and still lost. If you're new to Legends of Football League, we tell the beautiful game's greatest and most dramatic stories. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to join us on every journey. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The tales that haunt the corridors of football history. Stories of match fixing, of rigged elections, of referees with suspiciously heavy pockets. These stories are part of the game's shadow, the dark ink that stains its brightest pages. But there's one story that stands above them all, a scandal so audacious, so brazen, it almost feels like a fever dream. I'm talking, of course, about the 2002 World Cup. To understand it, you have to understand the pain that came before. For decades, South Korea was the team everyone wanted to draw. They were seen as a joke, a guaranteed 3 points. Every World Cup was a new chapter in a long book of humiliation. But then one year, a nation stood up and collectively said, no more. A decision was made. It was time to win, and the cost. The cost didn't matter. They hired a world-class coach. They navigated the murky waters of FIFA politics. They secured the World Cup bid through a plot twist worthy of Hollywood, and then with billions of dollars poured into the dream, they unleashed a storm of controversy that left the football world reeling. This is the story of how South Korea tried to buy a World Cup. And it's also the incredible tale of Byron Moreno, perhaps the most infamous referee of all time, who went from blowing the whistle to dealing drugs. So let's rewind. How did we even get here? Our story begins with a sight that must have been utterly bizarre to 19th century Korean eyes. British sailors docked on their shores, kicking a leather ball around, shouting at each other like absolute madmen. It was chaotic, it was strange, but it was fascinating. The seed of football was planted. But by the time the World Cup blossomed into the world's greatest spectacle, Korea wasn't really a country anymore. It was under the thumb of the Japanese Empire. For years, if you were a Korean football fan, your passion was a quiet, painful thing. The best you could do was cheer for Japan, and you can only imagine how much that stung a bitter pill to swallow, while your own national identity was suppressed. But empires fall. World War II reached its devastating conclusion, and in the aftermath of 2 atomic bombs that brought Japan to its knees, Korea walked through the back door and reclaimed its sovereignty. A nation was reborn, and less than a decade later, with the fire of new independence burning in their hearts, they were already chasing a World Cup dream. They battled their way through the qualifiers, and in a twist of fate that only football can write, the final hurdle was Japan. The winner would go to the 1954 World Cup in Switzerland. The history, the rivalry, the sheer narrative weight of it all, it was immense. What followed was an absolute masterclass, a 7-3 thrashing on aggregate. South Korea had done it. They were the first fully independent Asian nation to ever qualify for a World Cup. It should have been a glorious, triumphant moment. But the dream quickly soured into a nightmare. 180 minutes of football later, they were on a plane home. The record 0 goals scored, 15 goals conceded. And the final crushing indignity? Only 3,000 people showed up to watch their match. On that very same day, nearly 60,000 fans packed the stands to watch West Germany play Hungary. It was a brutal lesson in just how far they had to go. It wasn't a legacy, it was a scar. But surely they would come back stronger, and they did. 32 years later. An entire generation had passed before South Korea once again graced the World Cup stage in 1986. But their luck was no better. Their very first match back against Argentina and a certain Diego Maradona at the absolute peak of his divine powers. It wasn't pretty. Once again, not a single victory to their name. Fast forward another 12 years to the 1998 World Cup in France. This was their breaking point. In the qualifiers, they had been imperious, dismantling everyone in their path. But on the grand stage, the old story repeated itself. Just 2 games into the tournament, they had already conceded 8 goals. The humiliation was so sharp, so immediate, that the Korean FA didn't even wait for the group stage to finish. They fired their manager Cha Bum-kun right there on the spot. And in that moment of rock-bottom despair, a plan began to form. A ruthless, ambitious plan. They set their sights on a man who had just orchestrated one of their most painful defeats, Guus Hiddink, the Dutch mastermind who had coached the Netherlands to a 5-0 demolition of their team. The message was clear. The era of being Mr. Nice Korea was over. It was time to win the World Cup by any means necessary. First things first. If you're going to bend the rules of a World Cup, it helps to do it in your own backyard. You need home field advantage not just on the pitch, but in the halls of power. So in a move that stunned the geopolitical and sporting worlds, South Korea announced a joint bid to host the 2002 World Cup with Japan. Their former colonizer, their fiercest rival. It was unthinkable. This wasn't just a football decision, it was a seismic shift in international relations. The controversy was instantaneous and massive. No World Cup had ever been held in Asia. No one had ever even attempted a co-hosted World Cup. The purists were appalled. How could the tournament be split between 2 nations? Others pointed out the logistical nightmare, an entire sea separating the 2 host countries. The time zones meant that for the powerhouse nations in Europe, the games would be on in the morning, a blow to viewership. And underlying it all was the cynical belief that the stadiums would be empty, that these weren't real football countries with enough fans to support such an event. Despite the uproar, their joint bid suspiciously sailed through. To be fair, the competition was surprisingly thin. It was basically them against Mexico, who for some reason just seems to throw their hat in the ring for every single World Cup. But the controversy deepened. There were no actual ballots cast that year. FIFA announced that South Korea and Japan had won by acclamation, which is a fancy way of saying everyone in the room just sort of agreed. It basically came down to who could shout the loudest. Totally not suspicious at all, especially when you consider that the vice president of FIFA at the time wasn't Korean, was he? Oh wait, he was. In fact, Chung Mong-jun was not only the FIFA vice president, he was also the president of the Korean Football Association. I'll just leave that there. You can draw your own conclusions. In the end, the plan worked. After a staggering $4.7 billion was spent on stadiums and infrastructure, the world turned its eyes to Asia, and to everyone's surprise, the support was phenomenal. The stadiums were a sea of red. The passion was undeniable. The stage was set. And, with the first whistle of the tournament, the real scandals began. With Guus Hiddink now at the helm, a man renowned for his tactical acumen and intense training regimes, South Korea looked like a different team. Their opening match was against Poland, and they delivered a composed, energetic 2-0 victory. It was surprising, yes, but not enough to ring any alarm bells. A good start for the hosts, the world thought. The tournament moved on. Next up was the United States. The game ended in a 1-1 draw, but there were murmurs. An odd penalty was given. A moment where 3 players went down in a heap, and mysteriously not a single good camera angle of the incident seemed to exist. It was strange, but in the grand scheme of a World Cup, it was a footnote. Nobody cared that much. Yet, with 4 points on the board, South Korea's destiny was in their own hands. Win their final group game, and they would make the knockout stages for the first time in their history. The only problem, the team standing in their way, was Portugal. This wasn't just any Portugal. This was the golden generation, a team glittering with talent. Rui Costa pulling the strings, Vitor Bahia in goal, and the majestic Luis Figo in his prime. They needed the win just as desperately as the Koreans. In everyone's eyes, South Korea didn't stand a chance. But then the game started and the script was flipped. 2 red cards were shown to Portugal. The tackles were flying in no doubt. It was a hard-fought, brutal game, with both teams playing on the edge. In fact, the foul count was nearly identical, with South Korea committing 21 to Portugal's 19. And yet somehow, it was Portugal that ended the match with 9 men. And in the 70th minute, a 21-year-old midfielder by the name of Park Ji-sung, a player of boundless energy, scored the only goal of the game. It was a historic moment, but it felt tainted. The world was starting to pay attention now. The whispers were growing louder. But we hadn't seen anything yet. The real chaos was waiting in the round of 16 match against Italy. After that game, the football planet might as well have stopped spinning. What would you do if you were in the shoes of the South Korean team or their fans at that moment? After decades of being the underdog, you finally have a chance to win, but the path forward seems to be paved with controversy. Is the national pride of victory worth the questions that will inevitably follow? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on this complex dilemma. Now, before we go any further, I have to introduce you to a man named Byron Moreno. This Ecuadorian referee had been on FIFA's list since 1996. Back in his home country, he was already infamous, a man entangled in shady local politics and even shadier refereeing. There was one legendary incident where he added 13 minutes of injury time to a match, allowing a team to miraculously score 2 goals and make a comeback. Make of that what you will. This was the man who would be officiating South Korea versus Italy. And let's just say, he clearly had a soft spot for the home team. 5 minutes. That's all it took. 5 minutes in, and Moreno was pointing to the penalty spot. A foul on a Korean player. Oddly enough, just like in the USA game, there are no clean camera angles. We see the challenge. We see the player go down, but the definitive evidence is elusive. But you just had to look at the faces of the Italian players, at the pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief, to know that this wasn't a straightforward call. This was especially suspicious, given that the 2002 World Cup was the very first to be broadcast in glorious HD. The technology was there, but the angles weren't. Fortunately for Italy, they had Gianluigi Buffon in goal. He guessed the right way, made the save, and justice for a moment seemed to prevail. But from that point on, the match descended into absolute insanity. The Koreans, playing with a ferocious, almost frightening intensity, repeatedly hammered the Italians. It was one of the most physical, aggressive games ever seen at a World Cup. And yet the yellow cards seemed to be reserved exclusively for one team. They tripped Damiano Tomasi when he was clean through on goal. Nothing. Christian Vieri gets an elbow to the face that draws blood. Nothing. Gennaro Gattuso is hacked down time and time again. Nothing. Alessandro Del Piero gets rugby tackled inside the penalty area. The whistle stays silent. The legendary Paolo Maldini, one of the greatest defenders to ever grace the game, gets kicked in the back of the head. Moreno just waves play on. You had players lying on the pitch bleeding from their foreheads, and the referee didn't seem to care. A South Korean player smacks Del Piero with a flying elbow, a clear 100% red card on any other day of the week. On that night, nothing at all. By the 90-minute mark, the score was locked at 1-1. Back in 2002, this meant we were heading for a golden goal. The next team to score wins. The tension was unbearable, the stakes couldn't be higher. And this is where Byron Moreno took his performance to a level beyond parody. Francesco Totti, the Prince of Rome, dribbles into the Korean box. He's tripped by a defender. There's clear contact. Moreno blows his whistle, signaling for a foul. Surely it's a penalty for Italy. But no. In an astonishing decision, he signals a free kick for the Koreans. Moreno decides that Totti has dived, and he brandishes a second yellow card, sending the Italian talisman off. It was unbelievable. Made even more so by the fact that Moreno was a good 40 yards away from the play when he made the call. The madness wasn't over. A few minutes later, Damiano Tomasi breaks the offside trap. He's completely through on goal one-on-one with the keeper. He rounds him, and just as he's about to slot the ball into the empty net and send Italy through, the whistle blows. The linesman's flag is up. Offside. Except, and you've probably guessed it by now, he wasn't. He really wasn't. He was played on by at least a yard. The replays confirmed it instantly. It was a phantom call. And to finish it all off, Ahn Jung-hwan, the very player whose penalty was saved earlier, rises in the 117th minute to head home the golden goal. The match is over. South Korea have won. The Italians weren't just upset. They were beyond livid. Forget the players on the pitch running on pure adrenaline and rage. You can almost forgive their explosive reactions. Back home, things went completely wild. The country felt robbed, cheated out of their World Cup dream by a conspiracy. Italian minister Franco Frattini went on television and called the match a disgrace, absolutely scandalous, claiming it seemed like a group of people had gathered around a table and decided to throw us out. The head of the Italian football delegation didn't hold back either, stating Korea is a powerful country. It's clear they have done something. The refereeing was something out of a comedy film. And amidst all this fury, there is one consequence that is so absurd, so perfectly petty, that you just have to laugh. The man who scored that golden goal, Ahn Jung-hwan, just so happened to be playing his club football in Italy for a team called Perugia. He had scored more goals in that one World Cup than he had all season for his club. The reaction from the Perugia owner was swift and merciless. He fired him. Just like that. His public statement was iconic. He will never set foot in Perugia again. He only decided to play like a superstar once he was up against Italy. This was a direct offense to our nation, a country who welcomed him with open arms 2 years ago. I mean, I get the frustration, but the man is a striker. Did you expect him not to try and score? You should be happy your player is in red-hot form. The blatant controversy of these knockout games is the stuff of legend. But the fallout, the fates of the referees, and the lasting legacy of this tournament reveal even more shocking truths. If you love these deep dives into football's most incredible and controversial moments, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss where this story goes next. So after sending home a generation of Italian giants, Maldini, Totti, Del Piero, Vieri, it was time for South Korea's next challenge, the Great Spanish Armada. This was a team loaded with icons. Fernando Hierro and Carles Puyol marshalling the defense, Fernando Morientes up front, a young Xavi Hernandez pulling the strings in midfield. Once again on paper, the Koreans stood no chance. And so, the beautiful game turned into a boxing match. Elbows were flying everywhere. Every time a Spanish player made a run, every through ball was met with a linesman's flag. It didn't matter where the players were on the pitch. If you were wearing a Spain shirt, you were offside. Early in the game, Spain put the ball in the back of the net. Goal disallowed. Apparently there was a foul in the build-up. Someone had gotten too rough with a defender. I didn't see it. Nobody in the stadium saw it. The millions watching at home didn't see it. But Gamal Al-Gandour, the Egyptian referee for the day, he saw it. And that's all that mattered. Later, a young Luis Enrique, who would go on to manage Spain and Barcelona, was put clean through on goal. One-on-one with the keeper. The flag goes up. Offside. Again. Except again, it wasn't. The replays were damning. In extra time, as Spain desperately hunted for that elusive golden goal, Joaquin, the tricky winger, delivered a perfect cross. Morientes met it with a powerful header. Goal. Spain celebrates. They think they've won it. But no. The linesman claimed the ball had gone out of play before Joaquin crossed it. It hadn't. It was at least a foot in bounds. By the end of it all, after 120 minutes of frustration, it went to a penalty shootout. Surely they couldn't mess this up. A shootout is straightforward, right? Wrong. The only miss of the entire shootout came from Joaquin. But as he took the shot, the Korean goalkeeper Lee Woon-jae came a good 2 feet off his line before the ball was struck. It was a clear violation of the rules. The penalty should have been retaken, but it wasn't. South Korea won the shootout, and Spain was out. The reaction was a carbon copy of the Italian one. Utter outrage. Hierro, the Spanish captain, said they had expected it after watching what had happened to Italy and Portugal. The Spanish newspapers had a field day, with all sorts of clever and furious front pages, decrying the theft of the century. The pressure was so immense that FIFA finally had to say something. The president himself. Sepp Blatter came out and claimed it was all just a coincidence, a matter of exceptional circumstances and human error. After the Spain game, the jig was up. There was no chance they could get away with another performance like that. The entire world was watching, scrutinizing every single call. And so in the semifinals against Germany, things suddenly returned to normal. The game was intense, a hard-fought battle, but it was fair. The Germans eventually took the win with a single goal from the magnificent Michael Ballack, a goal that took them nearly 90 minutes of grit and determination to score. There was one moment, a potential penalty shot for Germany, that was waved away, but nobody really cared. The spell had been broken. The Koreans were finally out. Their journey wasn't quite over. The third-place playoff against Turkey was like a final for the underdogs, a celebration of two teams who had defied all expectations. And in a flash, just 8 seconds into the match, Turkey's Hakan Şükür scored the fastest goal in World Cup history. By the end of a thrilling 3-2 game, it was Turkey who would take home the bronze medal. Still, for the Korean people, there was more than enough reason to be ecstatic. Their captain Hong Myung-bo won the bronze ball, awarded to the third-best player in the entire tournament. He and another teammate were selected for the tournament's best 11, the first and only time any Asian players have ever received such an honor. Despite all the controversy that swirled around their run at home, it was seen as a miracle, a moment of supreme national pride. Guus Hiddink became a national deity. He was granted honorary citizenship and was even gifted a lavish villa in Korea as a thank you from a grateful nation. But even after the tournament ended, more controversy bubbled to the surface. French players who had played a friendly against South Korea before the World Cup came forward with suspicions of doping. Frank Leboeuf was particularly outspoken, saying, "It's like they were supercharged. No one saw them before and no one saw them after the World Cup. But they somehow got to the semifinals. Just a year before we beat them 5-0. You don't think that's suspicious?" Suddenly they were fast as lightning. But I know what you're really asking. What about the referees? What happened to the men at the center of the storm? Well, their careers didn't exactly survive the fallout. First, Byron Moreno, the man from the Italy game, decided to go on the offensive. He came out with some truly incredible quotes saying, and I'm checking my notes here, "Italians think I'm corrupt because corruption is their way of life. They're all immature. Don't go and blame Mr. Moreno, blame yourselves." Such a humble guy. But then it seemed he had developed a taste for match fixing. He went back to Ecuador, and was involved in a series of highly controversial games, until FIFA, the same organization that had defended him, was forced to say, "Hold on there, buckaroo," and launched an investigation. He was quickly suspended. Which is odd, isn't it? Because according to them, this had all just been a huge oopsie, a big coincidence. Well, regardless, he served his suspension and came back after a year ready to live happily ever after. Except I'm joking. In his third match back, he sent off 3 players from the same team, turning the entire country against him. He soon decided to retire to escape the criticism. Surely now he would have a quiet life. And he did. For 7 years. Until he was arrested at JFK Airport in New York City with 13 pounds of heroin hidden in his boxer shorts. He was sentenced to 2.5 years in federal prison. From arguably the most incompetent referee in World Cup history to a laughably incompetent drug smuggler, as the great Gigi Buffon himself said when he heard the news. 13 pounds of drugs. It doesn't surprise me. He already had them in 2002, but back then they were in his system, not his underwear. And what about the other guy, Gamal Al-Gandour from the Spain match? Subsequent investigations by journalists suggested he had most likely received a brand new luxury car for his efforts. Though to be fair, the gift didn't come directly from South Korea. It allegedly came from a high-ranking FIFA official, the same Korean vice president I mentioned earlier. Al-Gandour, of course, denied all the allegations. But the fact remains that before the 2002 World Cup, he had a stellar, respected career. And immediately after that tournament, he suddenly retired. Not suspicious at all. It's been over 2 decades now. People still talk about this story, and time has only made the case against it stronger. Since 2002, no Asian team has ever made it past the round of 16, let alone come close to a podium finish. And as for FIFA and Mr. Sepp Blatter, well, I could get into that, but let's just say time has shown that he wasn't quite the bastion of integrity he made himself out to be. The 2002 World Cup remains a stain, a mystery, and one of the most unbelievable stories our beautiful game has ever told. And that's where this incredible, controversial football story concludes. What a journey, right? I am so eager to hear what you all think. What moment from this saga stood out to you the most? Did you feel any sympathy for the Korean side, or was it a straightforward scandal in your eyes? Please share all your opinions, your favorite moments, and any questions you still have in the comments below. I truly love reading every single one and building this amazing football community with all of you. Thanks for watching.